Professor Adrian was a young academic rapidly rising in the intellectual world. At the age of 35, he had already secured a permanent teaching position at a prestigious university. He was known as a rational thinker, an international speaker, and the author of books that challenged conventional views on existence and morality. Yet, behind his brilliant intellect, Adrian harbored an emptiness that theories and logic could not fill. He had explored nearly every branch of philosophy from existentialism to nihilism, from liberal Christian theology to Zen Buddhism. But still, something was missing, something he could not define. One day, Adrian received an invitation to attend a global forum that brought together religious leaders and business executives. That year's theme was spirituality and ethics in the modern world. He accepted the invitation with skepticism. To him, many interfaith gatherings were nothing more than diplomatic formalities filled with speeches that went in circles without substance. But as a scholar, his curiosity compelled him to attend. The first day of the forum was filled with long speeches and Q&A sessions. Adrian, seated in the second row, listened half-heartedly. That is, until the afternoon session, when an elderly man in a white robe, with a gray beard, slowly walked up to the stage. There was no grand opening, no bombastic rhetoric. He simply said, softly, "I did not come to convince you. I came to remind you of what you have known since birth." That was the first sentence that truly made Adrian listen. The old Imam did not speak to impose his beliefs. He spoke of the human fitre, the natural inclination to seek truth, to love justice, and to humble oneself before something greater. He quoted verses from the Qur'an, not as proofs for debate, but as a balm for the soul. After the session, Adrian felt uneasy. He didn't understand why such simple words had shaken him. Amid the bustle of the dinner reception, he approached the Imam, who was sitting alone in a quiet corner, serene, as if he needed no crowd to feel complete. "Do you have time to talk?" Adrian asked. "I always have time to listen," the Imam replied with a gentle smile. They sat together on a balcony overlooking the garden. What began as a formal conversation grew deeper and more personal. Adrian asked about God, about suffering, about justice, about human destiny. The Imam did not answer everything with academic logic, but with stories, with verses, and with silence. Why did God create humans if he knew they would suffer? Adrian asked. The Imam replied, "Because in suffering there are doors that cannot be opened by pleasure. God did not create us so we would never be hurt. He created us so we would know how to love, and love always carries pain." That night, they spoke until dawn. The Imam shared how he, too, was once a seeker like Adrian, once filled with doubt, once fallen, once hollow. But he eventually found peace in Islam, not because he surrendered to logic, but because he made peace with his heart. Before they parted, the Imam said, "Do not rush to believe. But do not rush to reject either. Islam is not just about uttering the Shahada. It is about knowing yourself, and through that, knowing God." Adrian returned to his room that night in an unusual stillness. He did not immediately fly back home after the forum ended. Instead, he visited an Islamic library, read translated Qur'ans, studied the stories of the Prophet's companions, and watched sermons he had once dismissed as cliché. Each day, his heart felt more like a seed being watered. His rationality was not wounded, but softened. He began to realize that he did not have to choose between thinking and believing. He could do both. Indeed, he must. 2 months after that encounter, in a small room with few witnesses, Adrian raised his hands and in a soft but resolute voice, recited the 2 declarations of faith. That day, he did not feel like he was entering a new religion. He felt like he had come home after a long and weary journey. After reciting the Shahada, Adrian did not immediately announce his conversion to Islam. Not out of fear, but because he wanted to understand Islam more deeply before letting the world label him. He began living a double life, a rational professor in front of his students and colleagues, and a quiet seeker in a small suburban mosque, learning to recite the Quran from a middle-aged man who worked as a taxi driver by day. That man, though not formally educated, had a remarkable memorization of the Qur'an and a generous heart. Adrian, who was used to academic debates, found himself silent when listening to the interpretations of simple people because their faith did not come from books, but from lives lived with patience. He grew accustomed to waking before dawn, feeling the chill of ablution water, and standing in the stillness of the far prayer. He began to understand the meaning of khushu, not as a philosophical concept, but as a full presence before the all-seeing. But he could not hide this change forever. One morning, during a panel discussion on ethics and modern epistemology, one of his colleagues, a senior professor who had known him since his student days, noticed something different. Adrian's gaze was calmer, his speech more measured, and he quoted something that sounded distinctly spiritual. After the event, the professor approached him. "Adrian, I don't want to get too personal, but you've changed. Is there something you want to tell me?" Adrian smiled, not defensively, not fearfully. For the first time, he spoke those words outside the mosque, "I've embraced Islam." The reaction was not anger or disgust, but surprise, like someone finding out a close friend had gone on a long journey without saying goodbye. "I didn't expect that," the professor said. "Neither did I," Adrian replied. "But maybe I've been walking in this direction longer than I realized." The news spread quickly. Some colleagues dismissed it as a passing spiritual phase. Some began treating him awkwardly. A few secretly mocked him, thinking Adrian had succumbed to Eastern mysticism. But what they didn't understand was this: Adrian had not given up. He was holding on. His greatest challenge did not come from outside, but from within. He had to balance the academic world, which demanded skepticism, with the spiritual world, which required surrender. In the lecture hall, he taught moral philosophy and secular ethics. At home, he read the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad with tears in his eyes. At times, he felt like a man living in two worlds. Still, he kept going. He began to write not as an academic, but as a human being. His writings on the search for meaning, on the dialogue between reason and heart, began appearing in independent media. Unexpectedly, many read them and were moved. Even some of the colleagues who had once been skeptical began inviting him into discussions, not to debate, but to understand. One day, several months after his conversion, Adrian returned to the same international forum. This time, not as a speaker, but as an attendee, quietly hoping to see the old Imam again. But he didn't see him. He asked the organizers. It turned out the Imam had passed away a few weeks earlier. No big announcements. Just a small obituary from an old Pesantren, noting his peaceful passing. Adrian stood for a long time in the garden where they had once spoken. He did not cry. But in silence, he made a prayer, something he had never done before. "O Allah, forgive him, and gather us one day among those who love you, not because they are perfect, but because they never stop seeking." And for the first time since becoming a professor, Adrian felt no need to know all the answers. It was enough to know he was heading in the right direction. It had been over a year since Adrian recited the Shahada. Now, he had found a new rhythm in life. He spent his days as an academic, a writer, and a Muslim, gradually building his faith from within. But amidst it all, there was still an empty space. He began to realize that Islam was not only about a person's relationship with God, but also with fellow human beings. In the stillness of his night prayers, Adrian often prayed for Allah to grant him a companion, not just to share his life, but to walk the path of faith with him. However, finding a partner in his new context as a convert wasn't easy. He didn't grow up in a Muslim community. His surroundings were still unfamiliar with the values he now held. Some Muslim friends suggested ta'aruf, a process of getting to know someone within the bounds of Islamic law. A foreign concept to him, but intriguing. So, he gave it a try. She was first introduced by a friend from the university Dawah community. Her name was Hannah. Not a public figure or activist, but an elementary school teacher in a small neighborhood. Her background was very different from Adrian's: humble, raised in a devout Muslim family, had never missed a prayer since her teens, and had little interest in academia. Adrian thought they wouldn't be a good match. But during their first Ta'aruf session, Hannah asked him, "What's your biggest reason for wanting to get married?" Adrian was silent for a moment, then answered, "So I have someone to hold my hand when my faith begins to waver." Hannah didn't smile or praise him. She simply replied softly, "I, too, want someone who understands that a household is not the final destination, but a vehicle toward Allah." Their conversation was simple. No dramatic romance, no grand promises. But from every word Hannah spoke, Adrian felt a depth not from rhetorical skill, but from sincerity. He didn't fall in love like in the movies. But he felt at peace, and that was enough. After performing istikhara and receiving the blessing of Hannah's guardian, they were married in a simple akad ceremony at a small mosque. No lavish reception. Just warm smiles, prayers, and two hands now joined in a sacred bond. Marriage wasn't without its challenges. Their different backgrounds sometimes led to small misunderstandings. Adrian was used to long debates, while Hannah preferred silence and prayer. But that's where Adrian learned that being a husband wasn't about winning arguments, it was about winning together in patience. They built their household not with wealth, but with knowledge and mutual reminders. Hannah helped Adrian memorize short surahs. Adrian helped Hannah understand philosophy and critical thinking. Each night before bed, they recited a prayer together. Adrian always added one line. "O Allah, keep our hearts steadfast on your path, and let us grow old in worship, not just in age." Years later, Allah blessed them with a baby boy. Adrian named him Isa, because to Adrian, Prophet Isa symbolized someone beloved by many nations, yet often misunderstood, just as Adrian sometimes felt about himself. By his son's tiny bed, Adrian often stood in silence. Watching that little chest rise and fall, he reflected on how far he'd come from his former life. He used to believe that humans could create meaning on their own. Now he knew true meaning had always existed, waiting to be found. And in his son's laughter, in his wife's smile after the dawn prayer, Adrian found that meaning. A few months after Isa's birth, Adrian's life gradually stabilized. A peaceful household, a well-organized academic schedule, and maintained spiritual moments. But deep inside his heart, a small voice kept bothering him. Will you keep this truth only to yourself? As a professor, Adrian lived among thinkers, people skilled in analyzing, questioning, and challenging everything. He knew that preaching in an academic environment wasn't the same as speaking from a mosque podium. On campus, logic is the primary language. Emotions are seen as biases. And beliefs are often considered weaknesses in thinking. However, Adrian was undeterred. It was precisely because he had been on that side, skeptical, cynical, and thirsty for meaning, that he knew which doors to knock on. He didn't start his preaching by quoting verses or hadiths. He began by becoming an example. He arrived on time, listened attentively when his students spoke, and never flaunted his intellectuality. He subtly incorporated Islamic values into his lectures. In his modern ethics class, he discussed the concept of niyya, intention, as a moral foundation, comparing it with Kant's theory of action motivation. In his Eastern philosophy class, he introduced al-Ghazali not only as a theologian but also as a great thinker who wrote about spiritual crises long before Nietzsche wrote about nihilism. Some students began to be curious. "Professor," asked one female student after class, "do you really believe in the concept of revelation in the modern world?" Adrian smiled. "If the modern world teaches us to believe in things that are unseen like energy, magnetic fields, or even love, then why should revelation be considered stranger than that?" Questions began to arise. Not in the form of open debates, but in honest one-on-one conversations. Students came to see him not because they wanted to convert to Islam but because they felt peaceful speaking with him. Adrian never forced anything. He just provided space. One afternoon, he initiated an open discussion outside of class titled Science, Soul, and the Search for Truth. He invited thinkers from various backgrounds, a rational atheist, a young pastor, and an agnostic philosopher. But he also included an unexpected speaker, a Hafiz of the Qur'an who was also a graduate in theoretical physics. The discussion became a phenomenon. The hall was packed. Students stood in the back because all the seats were taken. And when it was Adrian's turn to speak, he didn't talk about Islam formally. He shared how he had felt empty amidst accomplishments. After the discussion, personal messages flooded his email. Some wanted to know more about Islam. Some admitted they had secretly read the Quran but were afraid to ask. Even a senior professor invited him for coffee and asked, "May I come with you to the mosque?" Not to convert. "I just want to experience the atmosphere." Adrian nodded. He knew, guidance was not his responsibility. His job was only to open the door. He then started a small community called Fikra, a cross-religious and cross-thought discussion group. There were no membership requirements. No direct invitations. Just a space for anyone who wanted to seek meaning without fear of being ridiculed. And without realizing it, Adrian's preaching grew. Not in the form of lectures. But in the form of conversations. In the form of example. In the form of presence. One day, as Adrian was walking down the faculty hallway, a student approached him. Not from his department. Not a student he knew. "Professor, I just want to say I became Muslim yesterday. Not because of the discussions or YouTube videos. But because I saw you praying alone in the campus park every noon. And I thought, if a scientist as brilliant as you prostrates like that, maybe there really is something great behind it." Adrian was silent. In his heart, he whispered, "O Allah, you hold the hearts. I only walk you guide." Adrian had always known that in the academic world, words were the strongest weapon. He had written many scientific papers, textbooks, and articles on philosophy and ethics. However, despite his works always being recognized among academics, there was an unfulfilled feeling within him. He felt that there was one major topic he hadn't written about, one question that constantly lingered in his mind. How can reason and faith be combined in a world that increasingly prioritizes rationality alone? One night, after studying and reflecting, Adrian recalled an old conversation with the elderly Imam who had passed away some time ago. In that conversation, the Imam had said, "Islam is not a religion that opposes reason. Islam invites reason to think deeper, to reflect, to find the way to God." That phrase echoed in his mind. He felt that he had to write a book not just for Muslims, but for anyone who might be questioning the relationship between science, logic, and religion. He wanted to show that both could engage in dialogue, that religion did not have to be seen as irrational, and science did not have to disregard the search for the meaning of life. He titled the book Logic in the Light of Faith, Searching for Truth Amid Uncertainty. Adrian began writing with great enthusiasm. He carefully designed each chapter. He discussed how great Muslim scholars like Ibn Sina, al-Khwarizmi, and al-Razi had integrated knowledge with their faith. He also explored how Western philosophers, such as Descartes and Kant, tried to discover the truth through reason, and how their views sometimes clashed with spiritual principles. However, Adrian didn't just present theories. He also shared his personal experiences. He wrote about his journey from doubt, his confusion about God, and how he eventually found peace in Islam. The book was not just for reading, but for reflection. He wrote about how faith was not a blind surrender, but a journey that involved both intellect and emotion. For him, living in faith meant integrating aql, reason, and qalb, heart, both of which complement each other in seeking the essence of truth. Every night, after his child had fallen asleep and Hannah sat reading a book, Adrian would type quickly. He felt this was his great mission. The book was not just for recognition, but to provide guidance for those who might feel trapped between science and religion, between logic and spirituality. When the book was finished, Adrian felt as though he had undergone a process of spiritual purification. This was not just a book that recorded theories and data, it was an expression of his inner journey, a form of Dawah through words. He didn't write to gain praise or become famous. He wrote because he felt a responsibility to bridge the academic world and spirituality. Adrian decided to send his manuscript to a publisher well known among intellectuals. A few weeks later, the publisher contacted him, impressed with the work he had sent. They offered to publish it with one condition: the book had to target a wider audience, not just academics, but the general public who were searching for answers about God and life. Adrian agreed. The book was published to great reception. Not only was it accepted by the academic community, but it was also embraced by many who had been struggling to find a balance between rationality and belief. Students used it as a reference, and readers from various backgrounds sent him messages, thanking him for providing them with a new perspective on life and God. However, it was not that which brought Adrian peace. He felt more at ease knowing that every sentence he had written was not just recording thoughts but delivering a deeper message. A message that the search for the meaning of life was not something that had to be done at the expense of logic, and that faith did not need to be in conflict with reason. He knew that his Dawah had only just begun. During a meeting with a colleague who came to visit him in his office, the colleague held Adrian's book with some hesitation. "Professor, I've read your book. It's different. Unlike most religious books that often rely solely on emotion, you wrote with strong rationality. I'm very impressed." Adrian smiled. "It's not just about religion or philosophy. It's about how we understand our world and ourselves." The colleague paused, then said quietly, "I think I'm starting to understand. Maybe I should give more time to think about bigger things." Adrian didn't say anything more. In his heart, he knew that although the book hadn't immediately changed everything, it had made people think more deeply, more critically about faith, science, and the purpose of life. And so, Adrian realized that even though he couldn't change the world quickly, he had opened the door for many people to see the world from a broader perspective. Not by forcing them to accept his beliefs, but by inviting them to think, to feel the depth of faith that could be built with reason, not just accepted blindly. That was Adrian's Dawah. Not about winning debates, but about creating space for deeper reflection, where reason and faith could walk side by side. Elizabeth is an investigative journalist who has been in her career for over 10 years. As a devout Christian, she takes pride in her faith, even though she often meets people from different backgrounds. However, her work often requires her to dig for information from various perspectives, and this time, she is faced with a task she never expected. Elizabeth is assigned to interview a Muslim man, Ali, who is well known as a social activist in the city. Ali is known for being very principled in practicing the teachings of Islam, but he also has a fascinating way of interacting with people from diverse backgrounds, regardless of their religion, ethnicity, or race. He has founded several social programs to help orphans and poor families, and many people, including non-Muslims, admire his dedication. At first, Elizabeth feels a bit awkward. She often hears negative views about Islam and feels there is a large gap between her beliefs and the teachings of this particular religion. However, as a professional, she decides to remain objective and give Ali the opportunity to speak and share his thoughts. Their first meeting at a quiet cafe begins with some tension. However, as the conversation continues, Ali opens his heart. He speaks about Islam with love, describing how the religion teaches love, justice, and peace. Ali even shares stories from his life that show how Islam encourages selfless giving, caring for others, and maintaining a good relationship with God. At that moment, Elizabeth is moved. She is struck by the wisdom and tranquility that Ali embodies. Ali speaks about the beauty of Islam in a gentle way, far from the image she often hears in the media. She begins to see that many things she considered taboo about Islam are actually untrue. Over the following weeks, the interview evolves into more frequent meetings, and Elizabeth begins to feel something deeper. Each time she talks to Ali, she feels like she's finding answers to some of the life questions that have long troubled her. There is peace in every word Ali speaks, and Elizabeth starts to feel that there is something missing in her life that she has been searching for. Elizabeth starts reading more about Islam, studying the Qur'an, and trying to understand the core teachings of the religion. She feels increasingly connected to something greater than just inherited beliefs. Although she experiences confusion and doubt, these feelings never hinder her desire to seek the truth. One night, while sitting alone and reflecting, Elizabeth feels a strong calling in her heart. She feels that God, in a way different from what she had imagined, is calling her to open her heart even wider. In the end, she finds peace in prayer, which gives her certainty. Elizabeth decides to embrace Islam. She recites the two Shahadahs with full conviction, closing the chapter of her life as a Christian, and opening a new chapter in her spiritual journey. This decision is not an easy one, and she knows that it will provoke various reactions from her friends and family. However, she feels that this is the right path for her. Elizabeth experiences a spiritual freedom that she has never felt before. She feels closer to God, with His boundless love. Ali, who has been her friend and guide in this journey, continues to provide unconditional support. He teaches Elizabeth to understand Islam more deeply and shows her that the beauty of this religion lies in the peace that can be found in the heart, not in hatred or violence, which is often misunderstood. Elizabeth's story is not just about a change of religion, but about a true quest for truth and peace in life. She now lives her life with a renewed spirit, focused on contributing more to society and creating positive change. As a journalist, she is also determined to share stories that touch hearts and inspire others to see the world from a broader and more loving perspective. As time passed, Elizabeth began to feel significant changes in her life. The decision to embrace Islam had a profound impact on her perspective of the world. Not only did she feel closer to God, but she also experienced an inner peace that had been missing. Although she had found happiness in her faith, her spiritual journey had just begun. Elizabeth faced a major challenge when her family discovered her decision. Her mother, who was very close to her, felt disappointed and worried. They had a long and heavy conversation about the religious differences. Elizabeth tried to explain with patience that her decision to embrace Islam did not mean she was abandoning her love for her family or the traditions they had followed for so long. In fact, she felt more appreciated by God and was finding more peace in her life. However, not everyone understood. Some close friends of Elizabeth were shocked and began to distance themselves. They could not comprehend the reasons behind this change, and some even suggested that Elizabeth return to her original religion. But Elizabeth had never felt stronger in her heart, despite moments of doubt and loneliness. Ali remained a loyal friend, offering unconditional support. They increasingly discussed how to live a life full of love and virtue, which is at the heart of Islam's teachings. Ali also introduced Elizabeth to a welcoming and supportive Muslim community, which provided space for Elizabeth to grow further in her faith. There, Elizabeth felt accepted with open arms, without judgment. As a journalist, Elizabeth did not want to stop at her personal spiritual journey. She felt her new mission was to change people's views of Islam, particularly through her journalistic work. She believed that many negative stereotypes were often portrayed about Muslims, and she wanted to counter those misconceptions with the truth she had found in her own journey. Elizabeth began writing articles about her personal experiences, her struggles with spiritual and social challenges, and how she found peace through Islam's teachings. These articles started to draw attention, even from initially skeptical readers. Some people contacted her to ask more about Islam, while others expressed gratitude for finally receiving a more balanced perspective. Yet, while Elizabeth felt happy with the changes she had made, she also realized that her journey was far from over. There were many challenges ahead, and she knew she had to continue deepening her understanding of Islam, grow further, and continue contributing to the betterment of the world. One pivotal moment in Elizabeth's journey occurred when she was invited to be a speaker at an interfaith seminar aimed at building bridges of understanding among different religions. Elizabeth, who used to be very closed off to others' views about her religion, now stood confidently, speaking about how she found peace in Islam and the importance of living in harmony despite differing beliefs. "My religion teaches me to love others," Elizabeth said sincerely from the stage. "Islam teaches me to be a loving, just, and caring person toward others, regardless of their background." Elizabeth's statement not only astonished the audience but also opened many hearts that had previously been closed off by prejudice. She saw how interfaith dialogue could foster mutual respect and understanding. Elizabeth felt happy to be part of that positive change. Ali, who had always supported her, was present at the event with a proud smile. He knew that Elizabeth had found her own path, and that path was now filled with hope, peace, and love. "This is just the beginning," Ali said to her after the seminar concluded. "Your journey is not over, but you've started a journey that's truly meaningful." Elizabeth smiled, realizing that every step she took now was not just for herself but for the people around her. She knew that her life story would continue to evolve, carrying a message of love, peace, and mutual understanding among different faiths. And even though the path might not always be easy, she believed that each step was part of a greater destiny, one that was more beautiful and full of love. A few years after Elizabeth embraced Islam, her life developed in ways she never expected. As she became more comfortable in her new life, she met Adam, a Muslim man who was also very active in social work and Dawah. Adam was not only virtuous and full of integrity, but he also shared the same vision as Elizabeth to spread peace and love through the teachings of Islam. Their meeting began with a joint social project that emphasized diversity and interfaith tolerance. Adam was drawn to Elizabeth's sincerity in advocating for equality and understanding among different religious communities, while Elizabeth became increasingly inspired by Adam's wisdom and dedication to society. They often talked about their shared vision for a better life, exchanging dreams of a family full of love and blessings. A few months after getting to know each other, they decided to get married. Their marriage not only marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives but also became a significant moment in Elizabeth's journey, as she came to truly understand the meaning of family in a broader context. Marrying Adam brought Elizabeth many new experiences. Their married life was filled with happiness but also challenges. They learned to understand each other, respect one another, and give space when needed. Elizabeth deepened her knowledge of Islam, and Adam fully supported her spiritual journey. They had long conversations about how they could be a couple that strengthened each other in faith, educate their children with good values, and create a home full of love and peace. Shortly after their marriage, Elizabeth and Adam were blessed with a baby boy, whom they named Yusuf. Yusuf's arrival brought immense joy. Elizabeth felt a deep love for her son, and she realized that being a mother was an extraordinary spiritual experience. Every day, she learned how to be a loving mother, teaching her child essential values such as patience, honesty, and respect for others. Although Elizabeth felt very happy, new challenges arose when she had to face the views of her family and friends. Some family members were anxious and had not fully accepted Elizabeth's decision to marry a Muslim, especially after they were blessed with a child. There was a fear that their religious differences could disturb the harmony of the extended family. However, Elizabeth and Adam remained firm in their beliefs. They continued to show that religious differences did not prevent them from creating a family filled with love and mutual respect. Adam, as a loving father, paid great attention to the spiritual and moral education of their child. Every night, they read stories from the Qur'an to Yusuf, introducing him to the values of faith with tenderness. Elizabeth felt grateful to have a partner who fully supported her. She also felt that motherhood had given her a new perspective on love and sacrifice. Despite the challenges in her life, Elizabeth felt that Allah was always guiding her in the right direction. She felt increasingly connected to her faith, and the deeper she understood, the more she realized that God's love knows no bounds, regardless of a person's religion. One day, when Yusuf began speaking fluently, he asked Elizabeth about their religion. "Mom, why do we believe in Allah and Prophet Muhammad?" Yusuf asked curiously. Elizabeth smiled gently and replied with love, "Because we believe that Allah is the most merciful, and Prophet Muhammad is the best example for a life full of love and peace. We want to always be good people who help others and love them sincerely." Yusuf listened with wide eyes. Elizabeth felt that every day with her son was an opportunity to teach goodness, and every laugh and smile of his was an extraordinary blessing. As time passed, Elizabeth and Adam's small family grew happily. They not only became a couple who supported each other, but also loving parents to Yusuf. Elizabeth also became more recognized as someone who was not only strong in her faith but also had a heart full of love for others. She often wrote articles and gave lectures on the importance of interfaith tolerance and how differences could be a strength in creating a more peaceful world. Elizabeth's life now was a long journey full of meaning. From a doubtful journalist, she had transformed into a mother who taught her child about goodness and love. From a woman who once saw Islam as something distant, she now lived a blessed life as a devout Muslimah. Every step she took with Adam and Yusuf was a tangible reflection of her growing faith, with the hope that one day, the world would embrace differences with love. Time continues to pass, and Elizabeth's family grows stronger with an unshakable bond of love. Yusuf, now a curious and intelligent teenage boy, is growing up in an environment full of affection, appreciation for differences, and a spirit of doing good. Elizabeth and Adam not only educate him with the teachings of the religion they believe in but also with broader life values, tolerance, empathy, and respect for others. One quiet evening, while the family was gathered at home, Elizabeth sat in the living room with Adam and Yusuf. They had just finished dinner together, as usual, chatting lightly while enjoying warm tea. Elizabeth looked at her husband and son with deep gratitude. How this winding journey of life had brought her to this point, a peaceful life, full of love and meaning. Yusuf, now beginning to think for himself, looked at his mother with curious eyes. "Mom," he said, "why did you choose Islam? What made you decide to embrace it?" Elizabeth smiled, reminiscing on the long journey she had gone through. "Yusuf, it was a long journey full of searching. I was looking for something that could give me true peace. I felt that in this life, there were things bigger than what I had known before, and Islam taught me to always strive to be a better person, to love others, and to improve the world." Adam, listening attentively, added, "Islam teaches us that life is about giving, not just receiving. Every step we take is to seek goodness, to be part of a better change." Yusuf nodded and said wisely, "I want to be like you both, always striving to be better and caring for others." Yusuf's words touched Elizabeth deeply. Seeing her son grow into someone loving, honest, and wise made her feel that her life's journey had reached its purpose. All the obstacles, confusions, and anxieties she had once felt now seemed so far away. She knew she had made the right decision, a decision that brought peace and happiness into her life. Elizabeth gazed at her family with love. "I am so grateful," she said, "for everything that God has given us in our lives. Not just our faith, but also this family, which loves and supports one another." Adam gently held Elizabeth's hand, aware of how many blessings they had received. They both knew that this life's journey was not just about them, but also about the next generation. Yusuf was proof that love, affection, and interfaith understanding could grow beautifully, even amid differences. Elizabeth felt at peace, knowing she had lived her life with sincerity and purpose. Though the world kept changing, she knew that as long as she and her family remained steadfast in the principles of goodness and love, their lives would always be filled with blessings. That quiet night, Elizabeth sat with Adam, gazing at the stars in the vast sky. "This journey has indeed been unexpected," she said softly, "but I am grateful I found it. I found peace in this journey, and I hope to continue walking with you all, spreading this message of love to the world." With a heart full of gratitude and peace, Elizabeth closed her eyes, praying in her heart for their family, for a better world, and for every step they would take forward, always in love, always in peace. Elizabeth's story ends with simple yet profound happiness. From a woman searching for life's meaning through a spiritual journey, she now lives a life full of peace, love, and affection, alongside her ever-supportive family. The decision she made changed her life, and now she is an inspiration to many around her. As a mother, wife, and woman who once traveled a winding road, Elizabeth knows that true happiness comes from within, from the love that is given and received, and from the peace found through understanding and affection.